Are you passionate about creating stunning 3D product renders but don't know where to start? This comprehensive course on 3D product modeling and rendering with Blender is the perfect solution for you. In today's competitive market, it's crucial to have skills to create product renders that match or even surpass real-life photographs. In this course, you will learn how to create a complete 3D model using just a few reference images, as well as the 3D modeling techniques used by professional 3D modelers. But that's not all. You will also discover how to create realistic textures using Canva or any other image editing software, and use them as displacement maps inside Blender. This way, you will be able to create realistic materials to make your customers' products stand out. The course will also cover advanced lighting techniques to give your 3D scenes a professional touch. And you will learn how to render a complete 3D scene to showcase your skills in your portfolio. I am your instructor, David Jasma. I'm a self-taught 3D artist who now works for INDG. I mostly create 3D models for major companies like Coca-Cola. I am here to share years of experience and insights with you to help you become a pro at 3D modeling and rendering inside Blender. Don't wait any longer to start your journey towards mastering Blender, and let's jump into the first lesson together. In this video, we're gonna talk a little bit about the folder that you can see right here. So right now you can see a load of images. I took these all from websites like Pinterest, Pexels, or maybe even Google. I take them as reference images because I want to make images that might look like it or just take inspirations from these. And I will also look for an image which is a little bit more of a product shot so we can get some measurements. When you are working with a client, you can ask for pictures and of course also measurements because that will really help you inside Blender to recreate that product. Now, in this case, we don't have it, but I want you to see that also that shouldn't really stop you. If you find the right images, often a front view, maybe side view, top or bottom view, those, like the more images that you have from a certain product, the easier it is to recreate these. So please spend some time looking for good reference images because we're gonna create this entire model, render it, and even want to show it on our portfolio. So why not spend some extra time searching for some great references so we can get great results at the end. And of course, in the download folder, you can find the necessary reference images for this course. What we're gonna do right now is we're gonna take the most important reference image for the next part in our workflow, which is the 3D modeling. So make sure you open Blender, and in my case, I am using Blender 3.3.1, but it doesn't really matter. Then in Blender, I will go to the front view, which is just numpad 1. You can also see on the bottom left what I am typing, right? So if you're ever confused, it's on the bottom left. Now, here we can just drag in this JPEG. And why do we have to go to the front view? Well, let's say I add an image like this in just a random view. What will happen is it will actually be put this kind of way, right? It will be imported from your view. So it's all crooked. That is why I always go to the front view first. There are also other ways to import your images, but this is just easy and simple. Then you can select this, and if you want to move it around, you can or click on this X here in the middle. You can scale it up and down here on the sides, but you can also just go here to this little arrow or click on N, go to item, and then change the location. So 0, 0. Now, of course, this is not perfect, so we kind of have to move it in place. I'm gonna move it somewhere around here, but in the next part, we're just gonna optimize all of this so it's actually easy to work with. I see you guys there. In this video, we are going to, first of all, move this empty, which is our reference image, ref image, in place. And then we can also start creating the first base shapes. So let's start with that. I want to make sure my 3D model always stays in the middle. The way that I do that is just keep this cube in the middle, and scaling it up and down kind of gives me the size that we need, right? With S, we can scale up and down. can see that if I scale it down like here, that the image, the reference image, is not perfectly in the middle. So I can just select it, right? And then move it. I'm personally gonna do it with G and then X, because you just want to move it around the X-axis. So GX and just move it a bit in place. I need to scale this cube up a bit more. Here, move it in place. So this seems to work decently. Now, I don't want you to worry too much about the dimensions. You could, if you want, be very specific and go to scene properties, change the units to millimeters, and then put the unit scale also a bit down. But in this case, we don't need to worry about this too much. Now, the scale around the z-axis is, of course, not there yet, right? So I'm just gonna scale this cube around the z-axis, and then we're gonna move this one down again. Now, I also switch a lot between the wireframe mode and the solid mode. You can do this with holding Z and or clicking 4, or just dragging your mouse here and then release Z. So with wireframe mode, you essentially look through your model and just see the edges, right? So here we can easily see if we are reaching this height. So scale Z to just scale around the Z-axis, and then I move everything a bit in place. In this entire time, I am keeping my 3D model here perfectly in the middle. So I'm just scaling it around the Z-axis, try to fit it. And you don't really want to scale around the X-axis or Y, because it stays a perfect little cube. Okay, so it stays nice and square. So if you scale around the sides, it will just be this. If you think like, oh, I can already scale it around the X-axis, no worries, just make them the same here. Right, so you can just change them here and click on 1, or in this case it was 1.1 with me, I guess. And now we are nice in the middle. It does not have to be perfect, but we are kind of getting there, right? Awesome. So this left part is, of course, the lipstick when it's closed. Now, ref image, closed or with cap. And then I'm gonna duplicate this once more, so Shift D. And then this one is going to be, let's do lipstick, whatever. With this reference image lipstick, I just want to move it to the left. So I'm gonna hide my other one, so I'm just focusing on this one, and then move this in the middle, somewhere around here. Right, so it's nice in the middle. And some of you might think like, hey, but the lipstick is all the way out of here, doesn't make any sense. Well, if you turn this little cylinder, this lipstick actually goes inside or out, which will look something like this, right? It will move in and out. And actually, not the cylinder is not necessarily moving around. It's like the cylinder plus that part underneath. Like, I'm not really sure what is now turning around, the part underneath or the cylinder. But either way, this mechanism makes the lipstick go up and down. So now at least we have the measurements right. So I can check the lipstick or just with cap. In the next video, we're actually gonna start and 3D model this part. Awesome. I see you guys there. Okay, in this video, we're just easily gonna start with some simple shapes and create kind of the closed lipstick. I do want separate models though. I want this little cap here on top to be separated from the bottom. Also, this bottom part should be separated from the cylinder, and the lipstick itself should be separated from the cylinder and the bottom part as well. Okay, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 different kind of models, but at the end, they will all fit inside of each other. And the nice thing about making these different kinds of models is that it will help with the materials, texturing, UV unwrapping, and also with certain animations, right? So, very good to keep them separated. So let's start with the cap base shape here. So the lipstick can go away, and we're just working on this. So, the cube is our main model right now. We don't have to rename it yet, but in the future we will. If you remember correctly, To move this image into place, this reference, we kind of scaled this cube up and down and around. When you scale something inside Blender, you kind of need to show Blender like, hey, I'm happy with the scale and I'm gonna apply the scale. Otherwise, you might get problems with some modifiers. If I right now would add a bevel modifier, you can see that the bevels are working quite weird, right? It's very elongated. However, at the moment I select my model, click on Ctrl A and apply the scale, you can see it change immediately, right? So now Blender knows like, okay, this is the scale. From now on, we're gonna work with the bevel, and this bevel is how it's supposed to be. So when you scale anything inside object mode, you need to apply the scale again, okay? So one thing to keep in mind. So this base shape is decent. I'm actually gonna use this bevel modifier. We can do that. So I'm just gonna put it to maybe the amount should be lower. If you go to the front view, we can kind of see what the amount should be, right? So maybe something like this, 0.04. With you guys, it could be totally different, by the way. It totally depends on the scale. But I think this looks decent. However, I would like a few more segments in here. So maybe one. Let's do 4 segments. It looks clean. Let's look again. Maybe a bit smaller. 0.03. Looks a bit more clean. Yes. So 0.03 it is for me. 4 segments. And I will apply this bevel. Now, if we go into edit mode, which is top, you can see that we have our geometry here. And the one thing that I usually do is create quad topology. This essentially means that every face has 4 vertices attached to it. This is because I like to work a lot with the subdivision surface. And what a subdivision surface does is quite simple. If we get a plane here, this plane has 4 vertices and 1 face, which again means that it is a quad, right? 4. If we add a modifier, let's do the subdivision surface. In this case, I'm gonna keep it at simple. If I now apply this, you can see that 1 face has subdivided into 4 different faces. So this always keeps it nice and equal and really helps with the shading later on. That is why I like to keep quads. It is not always bad to use trees. They have their place. Even n-gons have their place, but I like to work with quad topology. Now, what is the next step? We kind of have a very decent shape here, right? The total outside looks the same, except this part here. This little part here, that black part, seems to be separated. It kind of separates the top, the cap, from the bottom, as you can see here. So I'm going to grab a edge loop with Ctrl R. As you can see, with Ctrl R, you can see a yellow line coming up. And this line goes through the entirety of this model, which again is also very good and very nice with quads, because quads keep a nice flow in your model. But that aside, Ctrl R, then click, and you can still move this edge loop around. And then when you're happy with the position, you can left click and it will go there. Or if you want it to stay in the middle, you just click once and then right click and it will just snap back into the middle. However, what we want is we want to have it here. So bam, there goes one. I'm going to create an extra edge loop here, move it a bit up and click here. Right, so now I have these edge loops here and then create this kind of little separate part here. Now we should separate the bottom from this cap, okay? So we're just gonna select this bottom face here. There are multiple ways to select all of this. I like to use the grow tool, which is this Ctrl+, but you could also just go here into your selection mode, vertices, make sure you are in wireframe mode, and then just box select with B and select these bottom vertices. There are so many ways to select this. It's insane. It's just whatever you like to work with, or also depending on the situation. So I'm going to click on P to separate the selection. And now you can see that with separating them, I now have 2 cubes. And we should kind of rename them now. So the first cube is going to be the cap. And the second cube here is going to be the bottom, or yeah, whatever. We can rename it later on anyways, but now we at least have 2 different names. And actually, I think this part here should also be separated. It will just help a lot later on with the materials. So I'm going to select the cap, then select this whole edge loop here, right? This whole face loop, I should say, and then P, selection, and this is going to be also a different model, which is going to be cap black, and then we'll figure out how we do that later on. It's probably all the way black in the inside, but yeah, we will do that later on. So in the next video, we're gonna extrude our bottom part here and create this extra cube on top and maybe even the cylinder inside. So I see you guys there. In this video, we're gonna focus on the reference image lipstick. We can hide this cap and cap black for right now, because we're just gonna edit this bottom part. This is actually quite easy. So just go into edit mode. With Alt select, I can essentially select this entire edge loop. Just make sure you're in the edge selection or the vertex selection mode. And then we can extrude it here, so E to extrude. Right click, so it snaps back into the middle, but it is still selected. And once it's still selected, we can just click on S to scale it down. And I want to scale it so it kind of reaches this edge on either one of these sides, so somewhere around here. Then extrude it again, right click, G to move it, and then Z to move it up, right? So I kind of want to go in my front view, G, Z, and move it around here. Awesome. So what we have to do now is we have to start to think about the cylinder. The cylinder will actually go inside of this bottom part, right? So if I extrude this and put it down, it doesn't make sense because the cylinder has to fall in here. So how do we do this? Well, quite simple. First of all, I want just a few more edge loops in here, just these ones, that will help with this next little step. And the next part is I want to know how many of these vertices are in this edge loop. So if you just select this entire edge loop, right now at the bottom we can see that this edge loop has 24 vertices. If you cannot see this here, you can just right click and turn on the scene statistics at the status bar. So here, verts are 24. We need to know this because we are going to import a circle. So with this selected, click on Shift S and put the cursor to selected. So now our cursor is perfectly in the middle here. Then Shift A and select a circle. So remember, we have 24 vertices. Bam. Then we can scale this down, right? And we know the scale because if you put the reference image back, you kind of know that it should be around this big. Then the next step is going to be us combining these together. So I'm just going to hide this image for right now so we can actually see it. Select this entire edge loop and then Shift Alt select also this entire other edge loop. Then click on Ctrl E and turn on Bridge Edge Loops. You can see that it totally messed it up for me, and this might also happen for you. So just click on Ctrl Z and we can do this kind of by hand. So if you just select these 4 vertices, click on F, and now we have a nice quad. Then I'm going to select this edge here and just click on F until everything is selected. So F, 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 and you can even hold F if you want. So now we have a very nice geometry around here. Awesome. Now, the next step is of course going to be just putting this cylinder inside of here. So what we need to do is we essentially can just duplicate this entire circle here with Shift D. So Shift D, then click on P to separate the selection. We're going to select this bottom 0, 1 it is now, but we can change it to the cylinder or whatever name you want to give it. Move it down around the Z axis. go into edit mode, A to select everything, and then extrude upwards. We also know how tall it should be, right? So make sure your reference image lipstick is back, and then go into the front view and move it around the Z-axis so it reaches this point. So right now, what you have is a cylinder or a cylindrical shape that falls into this cube. However, of course, everything kind of looks a bit weird because we're just working with a flat plane like here, and also this doesn't really have a nice subdivision surface yet. So let's start to add those right now. So add a modifier and add a subdivision surface. You instantly can see like, this looks weird, everything becomes smooth. Yeah, that is what a subdivision surface does. What we need to do is we need to create some extra edge loops, which are called supporting edge loops, or even some bevels, which kind of does the same, to make these edges more sharp. So if you add an edge loop, so Ctrl R, you can see that you can move it up and down, and the shape kind of regains its form. But we can also just select all of these edge loops around here, and you should do it with the edge selection tool here. And then also this one on top. The one on the bottom already has a bevel. And then just click Ctrl B. And with the Ctrl B, you can see that you can create a bevel manually instead of with the modifier that we used to do in the previous video. And the nice thing about this is that you kind of have a lot of control about it. And with scrolling up or down, you can create more or less of these little loops in between, right? So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, just like the previous one. You can also, if you left click, change them here, right? So right now we have 5 segments. I think that's a bit too much. So let's go to 4. I think 4 should be fine. The shape looks good. You can still change the shape, right? The width, you can still change it if you want to. And I think we should also change the loop side. So this just means, like, look here on top. It kind of goes with these loops, but if we don't want this, then we get a bit of a nicer shape in here. And I don't think it messes it up on the bottom at all. You can click on and off to kind of see what it does. And I like it more. So let's tick off this loop side here. Yeah, and that looks great. Awesome. So if we now just accept this, so left click next to here, right click and use a shade smooth. So it's also nicely smooth shaded. Turn on the subdivision surface, and instantly we can see that we don't get that weird smoothness anymore, but we actually get better shading. Awesome, right? Well, one last part that I want us to do is extrude this inner edge loop downwards, and then also create a bevel here. Because, of course, our cylinder will fall in there. And we kind of want to see a little bit of a gap between here. Because if I give this cylinder some extra subdivisions and a shade smooth, you can see that we have a little gap. And that just creates even more realism, right? In real life, it is like that. So we should probably also create it in 3D. In the next part, we're going to finish off this cylinder and also start with the nice lipstick shape here. It's quite easy, and I'll see you guys there. In this video, we're gonna finish this cylinder, this bottom part, which probably is already finished, and of course this black inside of the cap. We are not going to do the cap yet, and also not the lipstick yet. This is for a specific reason. If you look at the cap and the lipstick, you can see that both of these have some kind of displacement or texture on them. And this displacement I want to showcase in 2 separate ways, so you guys always know when or what to use. This one is going to be with a displacement map, and this one is going to be real geometry. There are going to be different ladders because, of course, we want to, sell our own products, right? Not these, or showcase our own products. So that is why we keep them for last. Now, there's also one important thing that I need to tell you. Save Blender. I didn't save Blender, so if there's something different because I needed to restart, I don't think anything is different, but just keep that in mind. But in general, nothing really changed. Now, what do we do? First of all, let's finish this cylinder because the bottom is already good, and we can essentially make a new collection with our final 3D models. So this bottom is fine. Then we have our cylinder, which of course still needs some work. So we know that the cylinder needs some thickness on the inside. So what we're gonna do is first just delete any kind of modifiers that we have. Click on top, A to select everything, and E to extrude. Then right click, so it snaps right back into the middle, and do scale. Shift Z to scale it around every axis except the Z axis. Here we are looking for a thickness that, the lipstick still needs to be able to move around, right? So somewhere around here, so we still have an opening on the left and right. This should be fine. Now, of course, we do want to add a subdivision surface as a modifier. However, you can instantly see that this creates huge problems, right? There is not enough geometry to get nice and smooth edges. If we hide this, we can also see that we have some geometry here on the bottom, but this geometry is in all cases hidden, right? So we don't necessarily need this geometry. So let's delete this entire face loop, so X faces. And once we now add this modifier, you can already see that the bottom doesn't really have these problems. So we don't need to add extra geometry on the bottom because this shading looks decent. Here on top, however, I would highly suggest you create or some extra edge loops, or you just select all of these edge loops here and then click on Ctrl B to create some nice bevels. So something like this would work fine, right? So this is already great. However, even with these bevels, you can see that we still get some weird shading here. This is because we need even more geometry, right? So an edge loop here and an edge loop here would already do wonders, as you can see, and now it looks great. So sometimes we just need more geometry in combination with, of course, our subdivision surface to create a decently shaded model. Now, the cylinder is done. As last, we have this cap black, which essentially is not just a cap black, it also is the inside of this cap. So if we look at this image here, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. This entire cylinder plus this little top bit here snap into this cap, right? Or the cap kind of snaps into there, whatever. We need to model this as well, right? So how do we do this? We essentially already have most of this modeling done. However, we just need this cap black to be a little bit thicker, and then we put the cylinder and a part of this bottom part on top. This might sound a little bit difficult, but if we just create a new collection, we don't really need to rename it. Duplicate the bottom and the cylinder. So just select them both, Shift D, and then right click so they snap back, and then move them both in this collection. We can also drop the cap black in here, and then just hide everything else, okay? We just want to work on this collection 3. So what we know here is that essentially this part here, this top part, all is a part of this cap. Let's start easy and simple. What we're gonna do is we're gonna select this cap black, and we want to combine it with this bottom part, right? So just, we can essentially delete the subdivision surface, and then just combine them both, so Ctrl J. For this bottom part, we do not necessarily need any of this, this geometry here, right? So all this geometry is kind of junk. Also, if you just click Ctrl plus to extend your selection, you can also delete all of these vertices here. So X vertices. Then what you want to do is you want to select this entire edge loop and then this edge loop here. Click on Ctrl E and merge or bridge these edge loops. We can instantly see that something is wrong. Well, first of all, we don't have this extra edge loop here in this cap black, so we also want to add them. But I don't think that is the only problem. So what we can do is we can kind of do this manually. So just select these two edges, click on F, and then hold F all the way through until it's filled. So this is one way to do this. Very fine. And now what we can see is if we get this cap back here, that we already kind of have a part of this inside, right? The shading is a little bit weird, and this is probably because we have some weird normals as well. If you want to check your normals, you can always go to overlays and do face orientation. And here we can instantly see, yeah, these normals are a little bit messed up. We will change them later because we probably will get more of this weird flipped normals. But you can see that this weird shading is of course because of that. So don't worry too much if you have some weird shading or even if you don't have. That's both there are fine. Now, how do we fix this cylindrical shape? Essentially what we want to do is we want to hide the cylinder. We're just gonna work with this edge loop here, click on Ctrl plus until we reach the end here. So we have only this outer edge left and delete all of these. Then select this edge loop, make sure the cylinder is back, go to the front view and then extrude this edge loop upwards just so we know the height of this cylindrical shape. We want to put it even a little bit higher because the cylinder of course has to fall inside of here, right? Perfect. Then we want to fill this up. So E to extrude, scale to scale it down, E to extrude again, M, and merge at center. So in these cases, when it's the total flat surface, I often don't care too much about it being a triangle geometry, because even if we subdivide it, it will be fine. However, you could, if you want, delete these edges here, X, and just delete edges, so dissolve edges I should say, and now we still have quad geometry, right? So this also will work fine. Now, awesome. Now, we can kind of get rid of this extra cylinder because we don't need it anymore, and we should just look at this shading right now. So the shading looks weird, and I already told you it is probably because of the face orientation, right? The face orientation should be flipped because now the outside should be inside. Because the only way that we are going to look at this model is from this side. The other side will essentially be this cap, right? We're gonna go into edit mode, click A to select everything, then go to mesh and recalculate the outside. So if it doesn't really recalculate it good for you, so if this inside isn't blue, then you could also try to flip it, okay? So normals flip. That also works. So this already is better. However, we are not there yet. Because even though this looks good, make sure you put the face orientation off again, we still have some weird shading artifacts, and that is mostly because we don't have enough geometry. And of course, you already know, even if we add a subdivision surface, we still need to add extra or bevels or supporting edge loops, right? So I am going to select this edge loop here, this edge loop here, click on Ctrl B, and then drag it a little bit out. And I might actually make sure my loop slide is off here. That looks good. And now this shading is already better. Of course, you can create some extra edge loops for even better shading. Looks good, very clean. I like it. This already looks good because we already, of course, have these bevels in here from our previous modeling that we did on the bottom. The only thing that is different here is, of course, this side. Now, what do? We just create a bevel, and I want to keep it kind of the same as this one here. So we know that we have 5 edge loops here. So Ctrl B, and then create 5 as well. Same size is a little bit hard to see. You can go to the front view and then kind of match them up, right? We can kind of see here what is happening. So the width should be around the same size. That looks fine. And that actually looks quite great. I would also, because this looks good, but it would look even better if we also extrude this part inwards. So I'm just gonna select this whole edge loop, extrude, scale shift set to just scale a bit inwards around here. And then maybe we're also gonna bevel this here. And from the side, this will now look like this. Cool, right? And the inside we have totally created with our newly generated geometry. In the next part, we're gonna work, of course, on our lipstick first. I first want to get the shape down for you guys to understand, and then we're gonna work on these displacements. I hope this all made sense. If you have any questions, please ask down below. But in general, I do think most of you guys can just do this, right? So let's jump into the next video.